Hey everyone, I am here with the amazing Nick Patenaude. Hey, and we are going to go through a bike fit. That's what we're gonna do because I think it's like this is one of the most important parts to get you comfortable and making sure that you are comfortable on a bike. And let's get it done early in the winter if we're in the northern hemisphere, so that you can have a full winter of training on your bike.
Training without injuries.
Without injuries, which would be
Yeah.
super cool.
The
So
best.
Nick is like, I'm actually gonna go on the bike here, and then Nick is gonna just go
We'll walk us
through
through.
like
Yeah.
totally all the things that we need to think about when we're doing it. So
Exactly.
let's do it.
Yo, let's do it. Let's
do
have some
it.
fun.
Alright,
So
come on.
before you hop on,
Right.
we're gonna take a couple measurements, and
Oh,
those measurements are gonna be very familiar with your body. I
yeah,
hope you're familiar with your own body.
I'm familiar.
So we're gonna look for 2 points, one on either side.
Yeah.
We're gonna look for the top of our femur
Okay.
and the external. There's the greater trochanter, which is where a bunch of muscle is attached to. So to find that, you're gonna lift one knee and sort of about a hand width below the top of your iliac crest or below the top of the pelvis.
Yeah.
There's a fleshy bit right up here, right in the hip crease, sort of right behind the hip crease. You're gonna lift and lower your knee a few times until you feel that greater trochanter sort of bulging in and out. So when you fully extend down, you'll feel it pop out, and as your knee comes up,
Oh,
you'll
yeah.
feel it sort of disappear.
Yeah,
You got it right there?
Yeah.
Perfect. So that's a greater trochanter. So all we're gonna do is we're gonna take a measurement from the base of your foot. So I'm just gonna go from the top of the sole here, right to your 2 point, your middle finger. Perfect. So we're working with 93.2 centimeters. So we're working with
93.2, that's where it is. Fleshy bit where it pops out when you
Right, it
extend.
pops out.
That's totally awesome. Okay,
So
got it.
typically we'll do that on each side, and
Yeah.
we'll figure out which side is shorter, and we'll do the fit based on that. But we're gonna take the 93.5 from each
Right.
leg,
Okay,
and we're gonna take a forearm measurement as well, so
Oh.
elbows in nice and tight.
mhm,
And all we do for this is we go from the tip of the elbow, so I take this line flush the elbow, extend those fingers as far as you can, and that's like right on the 5, and that's 45 centimeters. Then we do both sides, take the shortest one, and those are the 2 measurements that we use for like our most basic fit, just to
Right.
like mitigate injuries. Those 2 measurements are the biggest for reducing injury.
okay.
We already measured your seat height, but we're gonna do it again because this is on camera now, and you're already at 90.5 centimeters there. And we are at this 53 centimeters here. So
Okay.
we'll get you to hop on the saddle, and now we'll have a look at that. And I'm gonna write these down so that I can remember these numbers.
That's a good thing. I would have already forgotten.
Yeah, that's okay. And I'll keep my cheat sheet over here.
All right.
Super cheat sheet. So the next 2 parts that we look at require like slightly more specialized equipment, but don't worry too much about it. This is a goniometer, fancy word for a thing that measures the angle. You can think of it like a protractor. And what we're gonna do here is we're gonna take the measurement when your foot is at bottom dead center. So we're gonna take that crank arm straight down so it's perpendicular to the floor, and then feel like you're in a nice neutral position. Probably lift that heel a little bit. And that looks like a pretty solid bottom of a pedal stroke. From there, we basically take from the medial malleolus right to the center of your knee, right back up to that greater trochanter again, and we figure out the angle in between those 3. Ideally, we're looking for on a road bike, sort of like 25 to 35 degrees. There. We're sitting at about 40 degrees there, Tennille, about 40 degrees.
Oh, that's
Oh.
exciting. I'm at
Oh my
40
God.
degrees, everybody.
So
Okay.
so much excitement.
So what
That means
we
you can bring
will,
your seat a little higher probably.
okay, so what we're gonna get into is what happens when if we're too low or we're too high, and then the injuries that can, or the feelings that we can get. So we've talked about a little bit of like numb hands, numb feet, sore shoulders, lower back issue. How to get them, like what we want to know is like, we want most power, we want to be fast, right? So how do we need to think about that kind of thing? So we're just going through the process to get it so we can get there.
Exactly.
Exactly,
And the
okay.
last measurement that we take is with your foot in sort of that chain is nice and loose. We're on an 11-speed hub on a 10-speed bike, so everything doesn't work perfectly. In that 3 o'clock position, and right, we're at 40 degrees. And from here, the last measurement that we're looking at is from the bottom of the patella, straight down using a plumb bob or plumb line. We're looking at how close or how far from the center spindle we are. So for you, you're about 1.4 centimeters in front. So 1.4 centimeters. All right, so these are all of the measurements that we use to now determine what an optimal bike fit is for you.
Right, okay.
So as you were saying just a moment ago, essentially all these measurements, what we're looking at, so when we come down to the bottom of that total stroke here, the fact that you have 40 degrees of knee flexion angle means we could actually extend you a little bit more and bring you closer to that 25 to 35 degrees of extension angle.
Okay, yeah.
What that does is it just optimizes the hip angle, the extension, and the pressure through the knee. When we're up here, this is a big one for patellofemoral syndrome. So patellofemoral syndrome is like one of the most preventable overuse injuries in cycling.
Yeah.
So by having, you're within 1.5 centimeters, so you're in a really good spot, sort of plus minus 2 centimeters from the zero. With triathletes, we tend to put you a little bit further forward. Road cyclists, sort of behind the zero line. But essentially, if you think of that difference in space here, so if your knee was way back here,
Yeah.
your center of force, or where your force is being applied, is that much further ahead. So you're sort of extending through the toes and pushing forward. Puts a lot of strain on the patellofemoral tendon there.
Did you know that it was more common in female athletes than male
I
athletes?
didn't know that.
It is more common even because of our hip angle. So another thing, and because we are, don't quote me on this one, we'll have to research this one, but also just our
The Q
adductor.
factor.
Yeah, exactly. So something, and the patellofemoral syndrome, you really feel it when there's a pain in the front of your knee,
Mhm.
right? Do you,
It's
is
also
it
called jumper's knee.
jumper's knee? Okay. Do you feel it? I'm just trying to think of other things, like what's it connected to? So you might feel in the front of your knee.
Like higher up in the chain.
Yeah, higher up
Yes,
in the
you can
chain.
feel it through like the vastus lateralis and bit as well, but it's primarily rect fem is what's crossing over.
Yeah.
But I mean, all the way up the chain, you can still have those issues. The big one again is going to be like when you're in that forward hip forward angle.
Yeah.
You might feel it more if you're like feeling TFL, because that's going to be TFL is down here IT band. So if you feel knee pain more on the lateral aspect as well,
Okay.
especially if you get it while running too, right? IT band syndrome is really good for running, but because you're in that hip flexion angle all the time, you can get really tight IT bands.
Tight,
keeping it
bands.
close.
Okay. Okay. Cool. All right. So that's what we're looking for.
And then in terms of the nose to bar angle, so
Yeah.
that is correlated to that first forearm measurement that we took, right? So
Right.
approximately the length of like the front of the nose of the saddle to the center of the bars, if you have a standard saddle length, which is about 17 centimeters, we want those to be pretty evenly correlated, like pretty tight, which
Yeah.
you're a bit long right now, but you also have a lot of hip flexion mobility, so it may not be an issue for you. So like all these numbers are obviously like
Individualized.
yeah, highly individualized, interdependent. You can there's some play within it.
Okay. So you just said something. Hip flexion mobility.
Mm-hmm.
So can you just say if we have a lot of hip flexion mobility, what that means, and then if we don't have a lot, and why that matters, and like how do we know that we like what does that mean?
Yeah, for sure. So two primary contexts for that are me. So when you're on a road bike, you just want to hop onto your bars here.
Mhm.
So road bike, you're already in a more upright position, right? So the requirement to get into that deep hip flexion, which is the angle sort of in between like the top of the leg and the torso, that's gonna be like your hip flexion being coming up.
Flexion.
Yeah. So that hip flexion angle is going to be much less aggressive than say if you were on, if you just want to go on your elbows and sort of like that aggressive TT position, right? So again, Sunil has really good hip flexion mobility here, so she's able to maintain that rigid spine. But now what I want to do is I just want you to sort of like raise that back as though you don't have. So if you didn't have mobility there, you have tight hamstrings. It's going to cause your pelvis to rotate. And what that rotation does is it's now causing a lot of lengthening, stretching, and tension in that low back, you can go back to the neutral position.
Okay, so so that's really important. So I'm able to keep stability of my core here because I have good hip flexion mobility.
Exactly.
And that enables me to have power. Like, how does that relate to the, I guess it doesn't really relate to power. This is how you're taking on the stress.
It's more so going to be like how long you can maintain. So if you were down here and you didn't have that mobility, you would get that low back pain and you would have to like sit up and stretch and move around. And the longer you can maintain that aggressive position, whether it's here or whether it's on the drops, that deep hip flexion angle, essentially all you're doing, this is more from like an aerodynamic and performance perspective, right? The longer you can hold that, the more efficient you're going to be in your power output. So in like a triathlon, if you're doing like a medium middle distance triathlon, you want to be able to hold that position for as long as you can without compromising any of the musculature. Like if you're getting cramps in that low back because you're tight there, that's when it's going to cause an issue.
Right.
In terms of like being able to activate those muscles, I mean, your hips are seated on the saddle, so it won't really delimit the amount of power you can put out.
Okay.
But
all right,
it will very much limit how aggressive of a position you can hold.
Okay, so is that related to where this seat is going forward and backward, or it's all related to each other?
Yeah, everything's all interconnected. This saddle floor app is a big one in that like plumb line there. So in your sort of knee to spindle, how far forward your knee is over your spindle. That's really big there. But when you're on the bars, so that's that fore aft position is going to be a big one there as well. And those two. It also plays into your forward extension, like that fog bit center.
So
but
when somebody says hip impingement issue, what are they meaning? Like, I have a hip impingement.
Yeah. So I mean, that's like, it's like saying plantar fasciitis. Like oftentimes it's just like or shin splints. It's something that's used to capture a lot of different injury manifestations.
Okay.
So I mean, it could just be tightness across like the rect fem, and you're getting like a little bit of pain in that hip, or it could be you're actually like impinging a nerve and you're getting like almost like an electric feeling down the leg. Yeah. But essentially, it's any sort of issue within that hip capsule area. So as soon as you're having pain in there, you can call it hip impingement. Okay. So it's very much a broad issue. So it could be your psoas here. It could be a super tight psoas, which you get a ball and you roll on it. It could be so much fun.
Yeah, or get a massage therapist. Working out on your IT band would be something.
TFL,
right?
Upper lateral hip.
And then how does that relate into a bike fix? Like if you're really feeling a lot of, you've been told, oh, well, you have a hip impingement issue. How does that?
So if the hip impingement, so if we go into that aggressive riding position again, and say you don't have either or the drops or on the elbows, if you didn't have this mobility here, and so let's just pedal through one stroke and then stop at the top here, right? So if you didn't have that ability, if this was causing you pain, so like especially right in here in that hip, if you're getting pain in here, you don't have that mobility or that capacity to get up here, you can cause tightness over time, like repetitive stress injury is really common, right? And so if you have really weak hip flexors, so if you're not if the musculature that lifts that hip is very weak, the further you are in that deep hip position, the more compromised those muscles are, and the more other muscles have to work to take over for those muscles. So keep doing your squats. Do your squats, definitely do your core exercise, diaphragmatic breathing, and like really working on getting those hip flexors working. Hip flexors get left out a lot, so like dead bugs are really good for that when you have like the Swiss ball laying on your back, holding it, so you're keeping that pressure across the hip. But maintaining that strength and then working within your joint range as well, like not overstretching and overexerting those joint ranges. Love it. Okay. Awesome. Okay, so we're totally going on. Okay, so where are we now in our bike fit? So our hands are on the handlebars here. And so like I was saying, I think we're a bit long actually on what your stem was, right? So you can see your elbows are totally locked out when you're up here. So if I put you on the hoods, you're extending a little bit through those shoulders. You can even see, I don't know if you can see in the video, but I want you to draw your shoulder blades down and back in towards each other. You're trying to create like a stable, like you're trying to stabilize those shoulder blades.
I actually can't.
But you can't when you're in that fully extended position,
No.
right? 'Cause it's slightly too far. So you're
Yeah.
gonna sit up for a second, and I'm just gonna slide this back.
So what Nick has done here, he's put it on a really cool tool where we can move my stem backwards and forwards and up and down.
Exactly.
And up and down, so we can figure out what kind of stem, what size of stem I actually need. Now, I have a lot of mobility, so I can get away, I have gotten away probably with a ton that is not ideal. I think that's what we're gonna learn in this experience.
And a lot of that is fine too, like,
Yeah,
up
as long as
until a
you're
certain
comfortable.
point, yeah, as long
Yeah.
as it's not causing pain.
Pain.
But when it does, then we
That's
can
a
address it.
problem, yeah.
So now I want you to get on those hoods again, so it's sort of like a casual
Yeah.
like riding position. And you can see sort of like your traps aren't as hyperactive, and there's a
Right.
slight bend in those elbows now, like
Yeah.
you've got like 5 to 7 degrees of bend.
Yeah.
And that's bringing you from a 110 millimeter stem to an 80. So a
Yeah.
3 centimeter difference in that stem length gives you so much more space in your shoulder girdle and in those elbows. So thinking that's gonna do, I'm gonna put it forward again, so you can
Yeah.
sit up. When you're in that 110, so I want you to go into sort of like what you would typically ride, like it's a comfortable riding position,
All right,
right? So now when you're fully extended, your wrists are also slightly more extended as well. So you can talk about things like carpal tunnel, but also the pressure that you're putting in
yeah,
on the sort of like the palmar surface.
Right.
So you're getting a little bit more up like right behind the thumb almost and right into that groove
yeah,
of the carpal tunnel.
yeah,
Right,
yeah.
whereas when it comes back a little bit, because you're not as extended, you can get a more relaxed grip on
Okay.
the,
So that's really important. You said when you're in a more aggressive, when you're too far forward, is that when you get some numbness?
yeah, so you definitely can. And
Yeah.
a lot of that is gonna be because all of your nerves
Yeah.
are all fully extended now. You don't have that bend, so all of the musculature around can now cause more pinching. So
Right,
you can get a little bit more tightness, but then also because there's no bend in that elbow, there's no laxity there. Whereas
Right.
when you're bent, there's a little bit more
Yeah.
laxity.
you're
So
taking
you
the
can actually
bumps.
absorb.
Yeah.
Exactly, they're not just jamming right into the bones, you're actually
Yeah.
soaking up some of that. It's like running, when people run and they have that straight leg extension, that huge jolt of energy and inertia that's coming right up through the leg causes a lot more injury than slight bend where you can absorb that shock.
Right,
So,
same thing with your
shock
elbows
absorption.
and like it's taking quite a bit on here. Okay,
And that'll also track its way up through those traps as well. So a lot of times people will have either like shoulder pain in the lower shoulders or in the upper shoulder in the traps, or
Yeah.
like even behind the head here, right?
Yeah.
That like suboccipital area.
yeah,
So a lot of that, if you're overextending all the time,
Yeah.
your traps are always trying to stabilize your shoulders, and you're always in that overextended. So your rhomboids are constantly
right,
overextended because you're in a protracted position.
right.
So you don't have that stability or that laxity there either.
So there's 2 adjustments here that you can do to kind of lighten the load, so to speak, right? There's up, because the more you're up, the less and the less aggressive you are, the less kind of force you're putting into that,
Into the front
into
end.
the front
Yeah,
end.
the more upright you are, the
Right.
more that your weight is going to be shifted back as
Yeah.
well. You're shifting that center of gravity.
Right, and so I think that this,
What that would look like.
it would-
Let's just do that.
yeah,
here.
let's
see.
do that. I think that there's, if there's a recommendation here too, is like, we don't want to go directly into the most optimal arrow position necessarily that we can actually get into if you're new to a bike or new to riding or coming back into riding and
After a long COVID.
after a long COVID, whatever your experience is, it's to be progressive and that you can go into a progression for a fit, even like start maybe a little bit higher and then get a little bit more as you gain the mobility, you gain the confidence.
You can also have different targets throughout the season as well. Like you were saying, we're coming into like fall, winter, northern hemisphere. You can put it in a less aggressive, more relaxed position and spend a lot of time building up your metabolic profiles, and then as you get closer to racing, you work on that flexibility, especially through the hip and shoulders, and you slowly just get lower and lower and lower. So even like changing your fit 3 or 4 times a year, and then building your way into a performance fit, just like you would taper into a race, sort of building your body in terms of its flexibility into that more aggressive position. And then once the racing is done, it's a very difficult to sustain position. You come back upright and you do your recovery rides and your easy rides in that road bike upright position again. Build your way back into the next race.
I absolutely love, Nick, that you just talked about that. I think that is so awesome. So just to, I mean, I have a lot of questions for my athletes that are just like, how often should I be in aero? Should I always try to be in aero? And what Nick just provided to us is exactly what we're talking about in terms of periodization within Team Element. And that is like, how do we think about our year and how can we focus on different things better? And I think I'm just going to repeat what you said.
Yeah.
Work on your metabolic profile, work on your strength in the off season. We can do things differently. And it's, you know, let's get, you know, depending on what you're trying to achieve, are you trying to become a hill climber, go sprinting? Are you trying to get aerobic base? Like, who knows what your focus is going to be on, or just general fitness. But then you can change it again. And that's the key.
Yeah.
Is be ready to change it.
And build that change in. Like that change is part of the process.
Yeah.
It's like you don't want to be threshold all year because that'll just beat your body up.
Right.
You'll never have a good time.
Like go into a floor for once in a while, like after race season. Okay, so I love it, love it, love it, love it. Okay.
So this is a more, so one thing I did here is I just put that angle up and brought it closer. So that's like sort of like, this would be like a very relaxed style. You'd be very comfortable upright, not aero at all. Your chest would be very open to the wind.
Yeah.
It's very not aggressive.
Right.
So.
Yeah. So not what I'm going to do for my 140-kilometer ride that's coming up. Okay.
Yeah.
So what else do we need to discuss? Like, what else do we need to point out here? Or maybe just go through it. We talked about numb feet.
Yeah, so we sort of did a little bit, but one aspect we didn't talk about is cleat position.
Okay.
And so a really simple way to do like a cleat positioning at home, it's honestly like a lot of the research points to just like this one simple life hack. It's not a hack, but the fifth metatarsal, so behind the pinky toe, when you're in your shoe, find that bony process, and the first metatarsal, which is your big toe, again, find that bony process right behind the toe.
Yeah.
And sort of in between those two,
yeah,
right? If we drew a line straight through your shoe, this is sort of the range we would be looking for. You want the center of the spindle, which is the spindle on the pedal itself, to be about in between those two lines. And then depending on if you're a more or less aggressive rider, you can shift forward or back. If you really like that forward toe position, you have really good like arch support and strength. Generally, you will put it further forward.
Okay.
But for more like relaxed position, you can put it a little bit further back. Triathletes, we also tend to, not we, but I tend to put triathletes further back just because it takes a bit more of the calf muscle out, so you save it for the run.
Interesting. So triathletes, again, this another like small little detail.
Yeah, and that's also why when we do like the knee down, so having the triathlete slightly forward, again, it puts that calf in a more neutral position.
Yeah.
So you're actually deriving a lot more of the power from the upper leg. So when you're running, your calves are ready to absorb all that energy again.
Yeah.
And take that inertia. But if you just find those 2 points, find somewhere sort of in between those two, you can play around with it depending on how your foot feels. If you tend to get numbness in like the big toe in particular, then you might want to shift it back a little bit. If you get numbness in the back, shift a little further forward, but try and stay within that range. And then you obviously want to have your toes in like a slightly either neutral or slightly pointed out position. Very, very slight. There are again different philosophies on that. A lot of road cycling dogma has people bringing, you want your knees to come as close to the top tube as possible. Ideally though, like somewhere between neutral and slightly inward is sort of the ideal. As soon as you're outwards with that knee, outwards from like the hip angle, that's when you get a lot more stress and strain on that medial aspect of the knee. But yeah, that's
The
like
tracking,
tightness, traffic versus road cyclists
Yeah.
and
perfect.
that tracking.
Okay, can you give us a little bit about the controversy of crank arms? So
Yeah.
crank arms, maybe point out what crank arms are for people just for a
Of
second.
course. So a
because-
crank arm is basically just the arm that is attached to the pedal, and they come in different lengths. You can now get a really broad length, but sort of the standard length that you'll find is between 165 and 175 millimeters. It all gets measured in millimeters, and it's typically 2.5 25 mil, or 2.5 centimeter increments. So
Mhm.
very small increments. At which point does one see a performance benefit from changing their arm lengths is where the controversy is. I tend to, when I work with athletes, if they feel more or less comfortable with a shorter or longer crank arm, that's typically how I'll work with it. So the Fit Bike on the other side of the room here has a crank length that we can just adjust on the fly. In terms of like performance gains, there's different concepts of how it affects your aerodynamic capacity. Some people say a longer crank arm is more aerodynamic, and others will tell you a short crank arm is more aerodynamic. I haven't seen research in either direction that says one or the other. Same with the injury management.
Don't you need to be going a certain speed to be calculating the aerodynamic?
Yeah.
And isn't that probably anything, like, I know for, you know, wheels, you need to be above, like, at least above 25 kilometers an hour or
yeah.
30
30 is even like
ideally.
very low.
Yeah, so you're really not getting much unless you are confidently riding 30 kilometers an hour, so that's like 22 or 19 miles per hour.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Now, for crank arm length, if you are really struggling up hills,
Mhm.
if you haven't quite developed the strength, a shorter compact crank, is that something that would be interesting for you?
Potentially. So cassette is obviously going to be like the first thing to change, and finding a cassette range that gives you the most benefit. But then again, like some people have an easier time climbing with, like, you're not really changing the length of that lever too drastically unless you're doing like 18% grades or whatever.
Right.
But
Okay.
yeah, at the end of the day, like if you feel
Yeah.
more confident and comfortable doing that climb,
Yeah.
I would say go to a shorter crank length.
Yeah.
But in terms of like performance, you'll probably get a better change from just shifting your
To
cassette.
set out for
Yeah.
a bigger.
And even like so it's big in like gravel racing, but doing like the mullet style of drivetrain. So you have a road chainring on the front.
Yeah.
And then on the back, you throw like a mountain bike or gravel, so you can get like a 42, 44 on the back. And so if you're somewhere where you have a lot of hills that you have to contend with, and you feel like you need those extra gears, keep those big chain rings on the front, but just swap out that cassette for a wider cassette. So
Yeah.
you can even mix and match them, especially with Shimano.
Yeah. So you have given us so many things to think about here. So can we just like in like super summary here? So first of all, you did all of my measurements. You figured out where my trochanter was
Mhm.
to figure out my leg length. That's important because it helps you understand where your seat length is going to be. Then we figured out where my foot fell, forward and backward. Now, those two things are really important to understand where your hips, if they're rocking, you don't want them to be rocking. We didn't talk so much about that.
A little bit of rock is fine, but not an aggressive
Right,
amount of rock.
Right,
You want to
right.
have that sway, but not that dip.
right.
Yeah.
Thinking about it, you really to be progressive and thinking about it's the strength and the mobility of your hips to manage so much of the how much lean forward and how arrow you actually want to be.
Exactly.
So to acknowledging where you are in that, strength train during the winter, do a lot of rolling, stuff like that. So as, roll,
all the
general,
things TFL,
TFL, whatever.
all the good stuff.
Yeah. And then we worked on the front. Did I forget anything that is here?
So I think I actually forgot to mention when we did the limb length.
Yeah.
Well, I measured this and I told you it was a bit low, I think. But limb length, so that total length when we measured your leg, you want about 96 to 98% of that is going to be from the spindle to the top of the seat. but that's
Okay,
that's why we measure that, and that's how we use it to determine that seat height. And
okay,
again, that's just the base, that's the
Right.
foundation. Inter-independent, it'll be, yeah,
Right.
but that's a good place to start.
yeah, and apparently I need to raise my seat a little bit. It would help me with maybe just a smidge, just to help me a little bit more with my pedal stroke. I would just get maybe a few more watts, which we will do. We will do that. And then we talked a lot about where you fall in your hand. We understanding if you're impinging there, if your elbows are really straight, taking the pressure, you want to take the pressure off by giving yourself either bringing it up or giving yourself a little bit bend in your elbow. If you have numb hands, definitely be looking into that. Sore neck, sore back, like it all ends up relating, really. But I think that's huge, Nick.
Oh, it's a lot.
Wow, okay. I'd ask if
All
they had any
condensed.
questions, but they're not talking to me, so no, and I just want to thank you for going through this. This is like hugely awesome.
It was wonderful,
So thank
It's
you.
always great.
Okay, well, I'm gonna jump off and stop the recording, and
No problem.
here we
You
are.
want me to put your seat up a bit?
Yeah, we're gonna do that. Oh, big bites, you rock. We love you.